We're going to look at 4 times the Gospel of Luke tried to erase the brother of Jesus, James, and his family from his Gospel and from the book of Acts. What we're going to be doing is we're going to take a passage from the Gospel of Mark, which is the first Gospel that was written. And we know that the Gospel of Luke copied from Mark and from another source called Q. So we're going to compare the 2 Gospels and see the edits that happened on the Gospel of Luke that is going to be very obvious. For some reason, Luke decided to deliberately and without anyone noticing to get rid of the family of Jesus and his brother James, which is a very important figure for the early Christian community after the death of Jesus. Let's look at the first time where Luke tries to replace Jesus' biological family with a concept of a spiritual family. So in the Gospel of Mark, verses 3:20 to 21, Mark says, "Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, 'He is out of his mind.'" So to understand this verse, you have to understand some context behind this. And as you can see here on the right side of the screen, the context here was that Jesus was going against the social and religious norms. So he was preaching against the Pharisees, actually. He was calling them hypocrites and vipers and snakes and flipping off tables. So he was calling disciples, challenging the Sabbath law, and attracting controversy. His family went to restrain him because they thought he was acting irrational and causing trouble, which he was. So that's why they called him out of his mind. They were calling him, "You're crazy. You're going against the Pharisees. You're going against the other Hebrew Jews. You're crazy." So they tried to go to him and stop him from doing whatever he was doing. Now, when you see what Luke tells us about the same thing, in Luke 8:19 to 21, he tells us about the same story, but he's going to change a small details when it comes to the family of Jesus. And he says, "Now Jesus' mother and brothers came to see him, but they were not able to get near him because of the crowd. Someone told him, 'Your mother and brothers are standing outside waiting to see you.' He replies," look at this, he replies, "My mother and brothers are those who hear God's word and put it into practice." Now, this is crazy thing, right? This is a crazy thing for Jesus to even say. If you put this words in the mouth of Jesus, that's very disrespectful. Let's say me and my friends at my house, for example, somewhere, and then my friends tell me, "Oh, your brothers, your actual brothers, and your mother is here to see you," and I'm like, "Yo, my real brothers and my real mother is that who hears God's words and practice it." Like, that's not a very respectful thing to say about your actual family. But notice here how Luke completely leaves out the part where Jesus' family called him crazy, right? He did not mention that part, and instead redefines his family as those who hear, obey, and practice God's word. Why did Luke change this small information? Why did Luke literally replace the real biological family of Jesus with a spiritual kinship? Why would he do that? The answer is actually obvious, because we're going to see this multiple times, and when you see it like another time and another time and another time, you're going to be like, "Oh, I don't think this is just a coincidence," right? This is something that was done on purpose for a good reason. Now let's see why he did that. The why here is because this verse is humanizing and critical moment in the gospel, and it is a sign of authenticity. I'm going to explain why this is a sign of authenticity, but this is an important moment in this the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus is called out of his mind, because this is very humanizing, right? We know that the Gospel of Luke, just like the Gospel of John, has high Christology, meaning every time these Gospels are going to talk about Jesus, they're going to talk about him in a divine manner, right? But here we see that the Gospel of Mark do not think about the figure of Jesus as someone who is divine. No, he's just a human when it comes to this particular verse. And we're going to see it again and again. So we have a rule. It's called the rule of embarrassment. Because when you see like Jesus getting embarrassed, right? This is like someone, they call him, for example, crazy, out of his mind. This is considered as an embarrassment moment. No Pauline writer who comes like years later would add any forgery like this, or he would always portray the figure of Jesus as divine. So no Pauline writer would invent a divine figure and include that his own family thought he was insane. This is precisely the reason why Luke omits the accusation entirely and replaces it with the idea of a spiritual family. Next, we have Luke clearly deletes all the names of Jesus' family from a verse. And we're going to see this very clearly. So in the Gospel of Mark, verse 3 from chapter 6, it says, so the people were asking, so Jesus was actually preaching and he was sharing some wisdom, just to give you some context, to the people around him. And then they started like asking, who is this guy? So the people start saying, as we see here in the this particular verse of Mark, isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph? So in another Greek translation, it says Joses, Joses, which is one of the other brothers of Jesus, Judah and Simon. So these are the brothers of Jesus, clearly named by Mark. Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. So just to make sure, notice how Mark mentions the full names of the family of Jesus by saying, isn't this Mary's son, which is Mary, the mother of Jesus, and James, etc. Now, Luke is going to tell us about the same story, but we're going to see what he's going to be doing with it. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, verse 22, same thing happened. And then the way people were going to be talking according to Luke is the following. All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. Isn't this Joseph's son? They asked. You see what Luke did here? He replaced the entire naming of the family of Jesus, including his brothers and sisters, by name to, isn't this Joseph's son? And stop. That's it. Clearly, Luke here does not want us to pay attention to the family of Jesus whatsoever. Not even his mother, not even his brother James, who is actually the leader of the early Christian community after Jesus died. You know why? Well, because the reason of all this, after you read the Gospels and you read the book of Acts, immediately the focus shifts from Jesus dying on the cross to the teachings of Paul. This is why they don't want you to ask questions about, wait, what happened to the early Christian community? You know that Jesus had at least, he had exactly 12 apostles, right? One of these apostles was his brother James, who became the leader of the early Christian community. And these same disciples, they continued following the law and the commandments of the Pharisees and the Jews, the Jewish law, the Mosaic law, that Jesus was teaching them. They did not change anything. They literally followed the teachings of Jesus. Now, the reason why everything shifts after the crucifixion and the ascendance of Jesus to focusing solely on Paul is obvious. Let's continue this. So here, let's see why. Luke deliberately omits the names of Jesus' brothers in Luke 4:22, unlike Mark, because he wants to shift focus away from Jesus' biological and human ties and towards his divine mission and spiritual family. Again, they don't want you to remember his actual biological family or anything that has to do with his human side, because they want you to completely forget about his human side and just focus about him as a divine figure. All right, the third time when Luke tried to completely erase the family of Jesus from his gospel was during his crucifixion. So the crucifixion of Jesus. When the Gospels talk about who was present during that time, it is clearly said in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verse 40. He says, "There were also women looking on afar off, among whom was Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James the Less, and Joseph, and Salome." So here, obviously, Mark is telling us during the crucifixion of Jesus, this is one of the eyewitnesses who are cited during the crucifixion of Jesus, right? But unfortunately, we don't have any testimony from these. There is no sources of the crucifixion from these specific characters, right? So these people were present during the crucifixion of Jesus, okay? The mother of Jesus again, and his brother James. So if you read the Gospel of Mark, James is everywhere. But if you read the Gospel of Luke, James is nowhere to be found. Luke 23:49, he says, "And all his acquaintance and the women that followed him from Galilee stood afar off, beholding these things." So he's saying here that there was just a bunch of women who followed Jesus from Galilee, right? And they were watching the crucifixion. He did not name these women whatsoever. So Luke here replaces Jesus' family with the anonymous, unnamed women who followed him from Galilee. Again, on purpose, completely erases the family of Jesus from his gospel. Why is that? And if you're a Christian and watching this, of course you are. Why is that? Why is Luke doing this? And remember who Luke is, right? Luke is a disciple of Paul. So he's just preparing the way for Paul. So you read the first gospel, you read the second, and you get to Luke, you get to Acts, right? And that's why the letters of Paul are positioned a little bit later, even though they came before. So you'd think, oh, Paul is just confirming everything that we read in the gospel, but in fact, no. Everything that we read in the Gospels are actually Paul's ideas. They are Paul's ideology. It's all a dogma that was created by Paul. And unfortunately, he changed the whole religion of Jesus. The real Jesus, that is, the historical Jesus, alayhi salatu wassalam. Luke omits Mary and her sons at the crucifixion because he wants to shift the focus away from Jesus' biological family and emphasizes his spiritual mission to preserve a more theological, elevated narrative. All right, the last one, there's more actually. If you focus on this, you can find this. It's like they say, as soon as you see it, you cannot unsee it. You will notice it everywhere you go. If you read the Gospels and you read the Bible with an open mind, not a closed Christian mind. Okay, you have to read these with an open mind to see the truth, of course. All right. He did the same thing, by the way, in the book of Acts. There is something interesting, actually. When you read the book of Acts, if you know the history of the early Christian community, right, and you know that among these disciples, James becomes the leader after the death of Jesus, right? So he was a very, very important figure when it comes to the early Christian community history and what they did and everything. So logically speaking, if we have 12 disciples, 12 students who walked with Jesus, learned from Jesus, talked to Jesus, and slept maybe next to Jesus in the same house, right? And they accompanied him his entire life, right? His entire ministry life, right? Why would you shift from following these disciples to following someone who is only claiming that he saw Jesus? Why would you think that? Why would you believe someone who's claiming to have seen Jesus in a vision while traveling to Damascus, right? And not actually the people who actually walked with him, i.e. the actual 12 disciples. Anyway, so when you read the Gospel of, the book of Acts, which is also written by Luke It's like a sequel to his Gospel of Luke. We can see that Luke presents James as a prominent leader throughout the book of Acts, yet never identifies him as Jesus' brother, as deliberate omission to avoid emphasizing Jesus' biological family in power. In fact, the term brother of Jesus is never used in either of Luke's writings, the Gospel of Luke or the book of Acts. None of them mention James as the brother of Jesus. James is never explicitly identified as a member of Jesus' family. And with that, we come to the end of this small presentation, which is one of the many presentations I'm going to be doing. Actually, I don't know. I'll think about this because this took me some time to prepare to give you like a better idea, not just me talking and I'm like, trust me, bro. No, I'm giving you like sources and everything, giving you like exegesis and explanation, logical explanations, right? Instead of just some random guy on your screen telling you what this and that means. I'm giving you sources, I'm giving you information, I'm giving you references that you can check yourself. And by that, you make up your own mind. There's more to come. And until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.